Hello and welcome to ChooseFI. Today on the show, I have the great pleasure of welcoming Mr. Money Mustache, also known as Pete Adeny. He first appeared here on episode 131, which was actually nearly 4 years ago, with his good buddy Carl Jensen to talk about community building and the Mr. Money Mustache headquarters that they co-own in Longmont, Colorado. And I actually recently heard Pete on Bigger Pockets Money, episode 377. I heard him talk about something really fascinating, which was the skill of spending. And when I heard him describe this, I knew I had to have him on to discuss this really in depth. And I think this is going to be a really wide-ranging, fun conversation with none other than Mr. Money Mustache. Welcome to ChooseFI. Pete, this should be fun. I'm so excited to have you here.
Why, thank you, Brad. It is my pleasure.
So you described this. I'm gonna read off a quote here. So you said, the way I encourage people to think about it is spending less money is not deprivation. It is a skill. It's just like lifting more weight or being able to run further. When you get good at spending efficiently, you get more for your money. I just love this. I love really to talk about it in depth here. But have you always conceptualized it as a skill of spending?
No, definitely not. This is one of the things that you gradually come to realize over the times of writing and reading about this stuff. I just kind of stumbled into my own ways about money through however I was brought up as a kid and then how I formed myself somewhat as an adult. I think the first time I heard it described as a skill is, I think, on Early Retirement Extreme. Jacob's blog was talking about the better you get at the skill, the less it costs to meet your needs. So you got to separate this from deprivation, because that can exist too. Like, let's say you really love eating at restaurants, and then to save money, you just start ordering half as much food. So you go home hungry. You're not actually getting better at the skill of buying food at the restaurant. In that case, you're just depriving yourself. Or, if you have a car and it gets you to work and then you get a car that's twice as crappy, and then suddenly it's unpleasant and it's always breaking down, you're not really getting better at the skill. You're just depriving yourself. And that's how most people think about spending reductions, which is why it's so hard for most people. They're like, oh, I don't want a less good life than I have now. So why would I want to cut my spending? Whereas the spending skill is more like, how can I get the same or more of the stuff that I like and the things that bring me pleasure, and then keep some of the money back for myself so I can actually use that for freedom through investing?
Yeah, the way that I've always described this, and I actually wrote about the skill of spending after it really was like a lightning bolt when I heard you say that. I wrote about it in my bi-weekly newsletter.
Wow.
I said, I've always referred to this in a related manner where I say pursuing FI is living the same middle-class lifestyle as everyone else, but getting wealthy in the process. That's how I've always kind of conceptualized this skill of spending, because it's like this fun game for me where you mean I get to live the same middle-class lifestyle or upper middle-class lifestyle, rolling in abundance. I think both of us would consider our lives as really rolling in abundance, but yet everybody else is living paycheck to paycheck, struggling constantly, and I'm getting wealthy in the process with just a couple tweaks. And that's what it's always seemed like, a couple little tweaks.
Right. And it's definitely a pretty privileged place to be if you can have a lot of people no matter how efficient they are, you can't really have a wealthy middle-class lifestyle on like $10,000 a year, especially if you have kids and stuff like that. But that is kind of what my target audience is. It's trying to get people who have a lot of money to spend less of it and consume less of everything in the process, and then hopefully be able to have a lot more free time to do some good in the world. And then the tactics that we're espousing here, they become more powerful the lower your income is. So it's not like some kind of elitist thing where like, oh, let's make the rich people have good lives. It's more like, get better at spending, and then it helps you no matter where you are in life. But, we just happen to come from certain backgrounds, and it's a pretty easy sell if you can get people who already have a reasonable average income or slightly above average, to make some changes that are going to hugely benefit them.
So Pete, you said it becomes more powerful the less you earn. Can you expand on that?
Yeah, well, a super simple example is if you're a middle-class type income family, and then you go from having a car expense that's $10,000 a year, which is a pretty average expense for like keeping one car on the road and driving it a lot. And you cut that down to $5,000 a year by just driving less and picking a better vehicle. That just puts $5,000 a year more in your pocket. But that might only be like a 10% increase to your cash flow. And if you're right on the edge of that, it'll feel like a huge difference, but it's still like, it's not going to totally transform your life. Whereas if you're a single parent raising 2 kids and you happen to be driving like a pretty new Jeep that you financed, which is literally an example from my neighborhood, that could be tying up 100% of your disposable income or more. $10,000 on a $25,000, whatever, 30K salary. These people are spending 100% of their money just to have like a year 2020 Jeep that they're not even using. They're just using it to carry people around on pavement. So if they switch that to a reasonable car, like a 10-year-old Honda or something, they're going to have $5,000 per year in their pocket or more, maybe even $7,000. So they've gone from like always on the edge, paycheck to paycheck, possibly permanently in debt, to now $7,000 a year, $5,000 to $7,000 every single year, building up into their accounts, paying off all the debt just from the vehicle change. So like that life is transformed from that particular change, whereas the middle class life is just boosted a little bit.
No, that makes sense. And it's interesting you mentioned the middle class life. So I think one of my absolute all-time favorite posts of yours. So there are two. The first one is no surprise, shockingly simple math behind early retirement. But my other favorite is from way back in October 2012. And it's how to go from middle class to kick ass. And this one has always stuck out to me. And it's just amazing where you essentially have this side by side middle class and then kick ass. And it's this chart here going down. And I think the payoff at the end is the middle class person years to retirement is 43, and kick ass, which is essentially the same lifestyle, it's 7.5 years. And this just always stuck out to me.
Wow. I don't think I included that one in my bootcamp email series.
Oh,
and if I didn't, I'm going to have to revise it in there because that does sound pretty good.
Yeah, it's funny. I probably mentioned that post 50 times on ChooseFI over the last 6 years. I think that.
Wow. Well, thank you, Brad. That's so kind of you.
So, well, hold on. You do need to tell us about that bootcamp series because I was just on your site, obviously, quite a bit here. It looks like that's something new. But yeah, I would make a very, very strong plea to include that in there.
Yeah, and it has already grown. Should I tell you the bootcamp, what it is right now?
Let's hear about it.
Okay, so basically, I'm always trying to find ways to get my messages out there more without doing a lot of work myself. So instead of creating a bunch of new content, I realized, well, why don't I just harvest through my like 500 plus blog articles I've written over the last 11 or 12 years and cut out a lot of the crap and repetition and just take the best ones and make them into an email series, using like this automated email platform that I use. And so it took a long time because I had to dig through, pick the best ones. And by that point, a lot of them were outdated because they were 10 years old. So I rewrote them, all of them. And I updated the version on the blog as well as the new email versions. So like it's a way of improving all my stuff from history. But the point is you can go now and sign up for this bootcamp series where it'll automatically send you one article per week. And it's all like nice and crisp and condensed. And the idea is it's like a year of behavior change because I picked roughly 52 of these articles where people can just get a little bit of like a dash of reinforcement every Monday is what I was trying to make it. And overall, I'm pretty happy with it. It took me like all of 2021 to comb through these things and rewrite them and put them into the queue. But now it's just kind of working and I just make occasional improvements. Now I'm going to make sure that the article we mentioned is in there. I'm just really trying to push people to sign up. It's totally free. I don't have any stuff that I'm pushing in the series. It's just a way of me getting stuff out there in a more behavior changing way. So I think there's like 30 or 40,000 subscribers to the series now. And I would like that to be like in the hundreds of thousands because the more the merrier. And it's just going to encourage me to work harder and improve it more.
Yeah, that is really cool. And I'm glad the how to go from middle class article in there. But yeah, it's neat. Not to get too much of a digression here because it's hard when you produce all this content. I mean, we have 600 plus hours of audio. And there's obviously some really good stuff in there, but how do you curate it? And it seems like this very laborious skill. I mean, I know, frankly, like with AI tools that are coming out, there might be ways to kind of harness some of that there, but I'm not quite there yet.
Right. That would be cool. Yeah. If I could take my boot camp and then tell the new Chat GPT-4 or whatever, say, summarize these into a book and make it the best book. And if it could do that, I'd be so happy.
Nice. All right, so let's go back to that how to go from middle class article. So I guess you haven't rewritten this in a while, but just kind of part and parcel of this skill of spending and how to really think about what I think is a FI life, which is, okay, you're kind of sleepwalking, you're doing the regular middle class things, and then there are some changes we can make. There are some ways you can approach this skill of spending. I guess at a really high level, like how would you get somebody to kind of not wake up, because that's the wrong way of putting it, but like if you were talking to somebody who's just living that kind of spendy middle class lifestyle and they want to make changes, like from a behavioral level, how would you approach that?
That's a really good question. I think the first thing, the obvious thing is a lot of times people just need the tactics. So they're like, what do you mean my car is a waste? They'll have the Jeep or whatever just because that's the car they saw their neighbors having, or maybe they saw it in an advertisement, or they always liked these things since they were a kid. And then once people lock in a spending decision like that, they often just leave it and don't even question it. So seeing an example, and this is why I tried to write on my blog about all the different examples of like transportation, don't do it this way, do it this way. Here's some tactics. Like I have some articles and even a YouTube video about like, here's how to go on Craigslist and shop for a reasonable car. Check these boxes, look for these red flags. This is how you negotiate for the car. And if you apply that to the big things, like transportation, food, and housing, I've often railed on that where like, don't get a house that's 20 plus miles from work. Doesn't matter about any of your factors. The most important factor is that you live close to the things that you do frequently. And if you can't do it right now, then just keep that in your mind like a burning need. Like, all right, my living situation is no good. I'm surviving for now, but I'm going to constantly work on improving that. So housing, transportation, and food, and then a few other things. If you apply some pretty basic techniques of how to get better at the skill of meeting those needs, that will get you most of the way to the kick-ass lifestyle. And then there's a few more too, like energy use in your house. So your utility bills can go down by a couple thousand a year, and how to meet things like your entertainment and whatever else people are interested in. I'm interested in all these things, but it really depends on the person's personality type. Like some people go right into it and just want to fix everything. Other people just want a few quick fixes that just have the biggest impact. And that's totally fine too, especially for higher earners. They might be best to just keep focusing on their job, especially if they enjoy it, and not go right down into the weeds of like, okay, I got to stop using my clothes dryer and hang drying my laundry, so it'll save me like $100 a year in electricity. Like that's not worth it unless you enjoy it for higher earners. So yeah, focus on the big things, I guess.
Yeah, I like that. It's easy to get bogged down in the minutia, certainly. But to your point, those big three, the housing, the car, and the food, I mean, that's roughly 60% of most people's budgets right there, plus or minus. That's going to make, you don't have to worry about, like you said, the clothes dryer or the caricature of the cutting out lattes or avocado toast or something if you're getting those three things right. So that's kind of like an 80-20 analysis of big spending.
Yeah. And there's another thing too that especially applies here in the United States is I'm really big on health and fitness. And so many people are not like, don't really consider that as a factor in their lives. So like, I'm working too hard to be able to stay in shape. But if you can learn about that and how great it makes your life, like it makes you happier, it makes you better at everything, and then start incorporating that, interestingly enough, it will often cut people's lifestyle costs too, because you need to be walking outside for at least an hour a day, preferably in a nice place. And you need to be doing these other, you need to do a bit of weight training and some other vigorous stuff. Once you accept that that is a mandatory part of a human day, if you want to have a good, long, healthy lifespan, it cuts out a lot of stuff, and like your friends are like, hey, let's go drinking tonight at the restaurant. You're like, no, I got to do a workout, and the workout's free. Drinking at the restaurant's $100 a person per night. So it's great because it's a win-win. Like you're definitely going to feel better if you start to take maximum health as a mandatory thing in your life. But it really costs nothing to stay healthy. At the very most, a gym membership, which is what, like $25 a month, even less at Planet Fitness. So those things are great too, like fitting things in that displace other things in your life. It makes it simpler and more of a like wholesome and meaningful life.
Yeah, it's funny, Pete. As you're saying that, I'm thinking similar to how you just described the big three, right? In terms of our budgets. What's the 80-20 analysis in terms of health and fitness?
Yeah.
And as you're describing it there, it's clearly, in your case, weight training, which I wholeheartedly agree with, and being outside and moving for, as you're saying, an hour, which is phenomenal advice. And you can go down the rabbit hole. Obviously, we both know this. I think we're both addicts of the Huberman Lab podcast. I know I listen to Dr. Peter Attia all the time, and I'm trying to incorporate a lot of this because as you're describing, like going out for drinks, that's expensive. And also, if you've ever looked at like your sleep data, I don't know if you have gotten into that at all, but with the Oura Ring, it's crazy how if you have a couple drinks or you eat late in the evening, how it just destroys your sleep data too. And it's like, well, I mean, my life is going to be worse the next day based on these one or two little decisions. So again, that's kind of the minutia. But when you think about health and fitness in terms of, it's really a very similar mental way to approach this as our money.
Yeah, it sure is.
Actually, Pete, while we're here, so I heard you mention on Bigger Pockets Money how really, I guess you're spending time outside walking essentially or moving every day, I think with your son. And it's funny because actually next week we have an episode coming out with a guy named Greg who has a blog called Outside 365. He's a member of our community and he has set up this, I guess, community of people who are trying to at least move one human-powered mile, as he calls it, every single day. So that's kind of a minimum, obviously, but human-powered in terms of moving, walking, riding a bike. He's big into mountain bikes. And I just thought it was the coolest thing to set this up as like, hey, I'm putting down, I'm going to do this. I'm getting outside, right? There's no such thing as good or bad weather. It just, you go outside, right? Like this is part of my life. And it sounds like that's something critically important to you.
Yeah. So the 365, I assume, means like outside every day of the year, which is good. And it's funny, like those are really low goals once you get into these things, but it is nice to start with low goals so they're achievable. I mean, I can't even imagine like not going outside in the course of a day. Like I don't think that has happened in 20 plus years. There was one day where I barely got to go outside because I had a super strep throat fever. It was a couple of years ago. And I just remember that for how rare it was, like that I couldn't go for a walk. So maybe like one day out of 20 years, did I not go for at least a couple mile walk?
Yeah. And it's amazing when you think about how many of us are kind of stuck in these hermetically sealed boxes at 70 degrees all year long, all day long. And yeah, just getting outside and experiencing some of the extremes, some of, obviously, aside from just being out in nature, hearing sounds, seeing trees, looking out into the distance, right? Like all of these things, but just experiencing temperature extremes too. Yeah. Life is not meant to be between 68 and 72 degrees Fahrenheit all day, every day.
Right. And changing your mindset to embrace the hardship. And this is a good segue because it applies to the spending and the skills and everything too, is everything's a little bit hard when you introduce a change to yourself. And if you let your brain go the wrong way, it'll try to not let you do any change. I just want my comfortable routine. Everything has to be cozy and easy. But the funny part is that that's like a recipe for instant failure and depression. So your brain is leading you against the correct path for having a good life, which is really funny. So you just have to rewire yourself and realize anytime something is surprising or difficult or challenging, that's good. And that is the recipe for a better life. So you make sure that you're seeking those things out instead of like hiding from them. It's really funny because once you do this, it becomes obvious and you feel like, it's normal. Like I recently was hanging out with a friend who didn't have this mindset. And then I would be cold outside and they'd be like, well, I don't want to go outside. It's cold. I'd be like, what the hell? Like it is cold. Of course why would we want to give up this opportunity? And then I realized like, oh yeah, this person, we haven't been hanging around together very much. So no wonder they didn't have this mindset, which I had come to like assume as just this immutable truth. So it's funny, it takes a while, but then it becomes really easy. The good thing becomes easy if you repeat that enough.
Yeah, agreed. And I think that repetition, that's why I like that Outside 365 thing so much, is it establishes this streak, right? And like, I'm the type of person that ... goes outside every day, regardless of whether it's 0 degrees or 105. And there's something to that.
Yeah.
It's cool. And there is something about this looking for challenge, looking for difficulty. Like you said, it's almost like we don't think about it, right? I think on some levels, our brains and nervous system are trying to avoid discomfort, but you don't really grow in that space. You grow in the space of that discomfort, of overcoming challenging things, of experiencing some little hormesis that like seems negative in the moment, but it's something to overcome and you're going to come back better from it.
Yeah. Like how many people always take the stairs? It's like a very small minority from what I see out in the world, like in the airport or the hotel or whatever. It's so strange that, you see a choice between a staircase and an escalator or an elevator. And like, why would you ever not take the stairs? Like I always ask myself a question, do I want to be less fit? Like, am I so fit that it's too much and I need to reduce this? Because if so, I should take the elevator. But otherwise, why the hell would I ever give up this opportunity? Like I'm far less fit than I need to be and than I want to be. So of course, I'm always going to take the stairs. Like, I don't care if it's like 100 flights. If I can't do 100 flights, I'll do as many as I can and then take the elevator. but I wouldn't take zero. Like that's just such a strange decision.
I love that. Do I want to be less fit? And I know on a recent blog post you had called the California effect. Yeah, you had a picture here of a huge line for the escalator, and of course you taking the stairs, and it's just you and a couple people, but it looks like people followed your lead afterwards.
Yeah, it was funny. I got in trouble for that because they're like, "Oh, thanks for telling us how to use stairs." Like they thought I was really like overdoing that example and like portraying myself as some kind of staircase hero or whatever. But I was really just, it wasn't supposed to be about me being a badass or anything. It was just me like observing the strangeness of herd behavior where like people would line up for an escalator until they realized, oh no, it's okay to take the stairs because other people are doing it. I just didn't want to be first is what they were thinking.
And yeah, this article was great. And in it, you say you certainly weren't beating up unfairly on the people of the fine state of California, but it was this magnified version of the everywhere effect. And yeah. I'm going to just read something here. And you just simply said, the understanding that all of us live in a bubble, which we incorrectly perceive as normal. And I think a lot of this is this self-defeating mindset that you're describing in this article. And obviously we can't read the whole article here, but hopefully you can describe this of people who just kind of write it off. And we hear it all the time, right? It's like, oh, I live in a high cost of living area. I could never do it. Oh, blah, blah, blah. That could never work for me, right? It's just easy to write it off because your perceived state of normal, for whatever reason, doesn't fit into something that can help you grow and thrive. And it's this odd mentality. I'd love for you to talk about that.
Yeah. One of the funniest examples I get of that quite regularly in comments on my blog is people will be reading through some of my old articles that talk about how you should ride a bike to work if you can or walk to work. And they'll say like, well, this is stupid advice. I live 73 miles from work. Like it takes 2 hours and it's through like horrible country roads where there's like 2 inches of shoulder or whatever. And then that's it, period. It's impossible for them. And then they don't even come to realize like, I wonder why you live 73 miles from work. And like, were you born? Like, is there any other possible?
The only house. The only possible.
Yeah, like people move, people get new jobs and people move, but then they often close their minds right after that. You know, even if new information comes in, like, oh, I just realized I'm wasting my whole life commuting and spending stuff, you know, burning it all up in my vehicles. And sometimes you really have to remind them and like almost do a whole separate conversation about what would you do if you didn't have a house right now and you didn't have a job and you were trying to design the ideal lifestyle? Like, would you, now that you know that commuting costs this much and sitting is this bad for you and exercise is this good for you, and now that you know it makes a difference of millions of dollars of wealth over the course of your working lifetime, what would you do? And then that point, people would be like, yeah, well, shit, I'm going to pick a nice office that's near housing that I enjoy. And I'm going to make sure that when I get a new job, I don't jump to somewhere 73 miles away. At that point, people realize, oh yeah, and if that's true, then maybe it's also possible that I can make changes in my life presently.
Yeah.
So yeah, opening things back up. I know the trendy term nowadays is first principles thinking. And I think that's what I've always done since I was a little kid, partly just because of not being clued into social norms to begin with. In that case, it helped me because you just think, well, why everyone else is doing this, but that just doesn't make sense. So what is the way that I would want to do it?
Yeah, first principles thinking. You hear that a lot from the Silicon Valley crowd, right? So I guess you're fit right in there with the California effect. But
yeah,
I love how you say the ultimate lesson then is to remind yourself that no, your current life is not normal. It's super weird and super specific, and you can completely change the damn thing in as many ways as you like, and you absolutely will adapt and be able to handle it. That's beautiful writing, Pete, and that is exactly true. Like you can affect change on your own life. And I think so many people, like that's the damnedest part of this, right? It's like so many people think this is just my lot in life. I can't do anything. It's this powerlessness. I think your message for so many years now, the message that we try here at ChooseFI is you can affect change on your life. And once you see a little shred of it, man, you crave more. You crave more and more and more because it feels good.
Yeah. And if you see people doing it in your friend group, it makes it easier to do it yourself. And the California effect is that many people are in a friend group where they're all set in their ways. They all have the same kind of car. They all have the long commute and the high spending. You know, everybody might be into wine, for example, expensive wine in your friends group. So you think that's normal. But this is one of the joys of having these like FI community and meetups like we have with our groups of people is to try to help people meet more of this new type of like more open-minded and more willing to make change people. And then you see what your friends are doing, your new friends, and you're like, wow, this is very unique. And that's this person is doing things a lot smarter than me. And I'm going to copy some of those ideas. And I get to see that a lot now with a lot of these young, these young fire whippersnappers. They're doing things a lot more efficiently than me. And then I get to think, oh, do I want to adopt this into my lifestyle? People are like so good at house hacking where they can live for free, or so good at like Airbnb was a new thing for me. I never thought of using this platform, even though I read about it on the financial news. But now seeing friends who are experts at it and like they fund their entire lifestyle from like half of their house being rented out with just really good management, it's very nice new things to learn. And you're not going to learn that, if you're stuck in a very change resistant group of friends.
Yeah. And I mean, obviously, we are in this FI community where there are lots of open-minded people. And I know you have cultivated an amazing community for yourself there in Longmont. But as you're describing that group of friends in California who they're getting the $150 bottle of wine on a Friday night and they're just spending, like, what if that one person in the group had an awakening? How would you recommend that they move forward? Like, there is some balance here, right? Of clearly not trying to proselytize and try to convert your friends unwillingly. But there's also a thought of, hey, maybe I can lead by example, potentially. Like, I guess I'll cut this short and just say, Pete, what would you advise to that person who, in this spendy group of friends, one of them wakes up and finds Mr. Money Mustache? What do they do?
Yeah, well, it certainly has happened, in the past on the internet. And it really depends on your personality type. I've always reveled in being different. So I enjoy, if I find a new idea, I'm just going to start doing it in front of my friends. And they'll be like, what's that weird guy? Haha. And then I'll enthuse about why I'm doing it. And then it's up to them if they want to adopt the behavior themselves or look into it more. Or maybe if they want to say, oh yeah, you're just weird, we're not going to do that. You have to be comfortable with that. Like, that's part of being a confident human being, and it's good for you. And your friends will respect you for that unless you don't respect yourself. So, if you want to have a new idea, just put it into use. And like you said, live by example. You don't have to push all your friends. Like, you switch to the new smaller car. You don't have to be like, hey guys, your Mercedes suck. You should have a car like me, because they don't want to hear that and it's not going to help them. But if they just see you, that's good enough. And of course, you can add new friends to the mix. You can go to some meetups and meet new people and start hanging out with them. I mean, with my group, my peer group here in Longmont, it has gradually changed to be less just random. The old peer group was sort of parents of the elementary school kids. We all met in the schoolyard and became a big hangout group. And then over the last 15, 17 years that my son's been alive, I've added new friends, and the old friendships have sort of like drifted and reformed in different ways. So now I hang around with maybe more fire people and less neighborhood people, just because I'm into this, my own thing a bit more, and it's just more interesting. And there's no shame in that, right? Like, you don't have to keep the exact same people that you hang out with in every single day for the rest of your life. I just find it more engaging with the new crowd.
Yeah, I totally hear you. And like we talked about before we hit record here, I just got back from the economy conference, which was absolutely incredible. And it was just to be surrounded by 400 plus FI community members. It was just so invigorating. And I kind of forgot it's been so long. I mean, really since pre-COVID, since I've been to any of these meetups, and it just felt good. I mean, I left just absolutely enthused. And yeah, I mean, I think back in real life here, a lot of our social circle are exactly what you described, right? It's the friends from the elementary school or people we know up at the pool. And that's not to say these aren't nice people by any means, but there is just that fundamental difference. There is something about people in our FI community who, when we have this in common, like, it just seems like we're all on some level, and I don't love the word optimize, but like, just we think about our lives in similar ways, and we're all trying to get better. Like, you never meet more interesting people than when you're at a FI meetup. It's just like, it's astonishing, right? Like how many different variety of interests there are.
Right. The fun part is the fire community, despite the name, is not really about money or financial independence. I think it's something else that draws these people together. In fact, we rarely even talk about money in person together. It's more like just people who are intellectually curious and interested in new ideas. So they'll typically be people who try new things and they listen to podcasts and read books. And they're less likely to be the people who just sit around like watching sports every Friday and eating Cheetos and, talking about the same stuff. It's more like, hey, did you hear about this new book? Or did you try this new health fitness thing or this new money thing? Sometimes And I really like that. I love the flow of ideas. I don't like small talk. And funny part is, a recent podcast I went on is Paula Pant's Afford Anything podcast.
Yeah, I heard that.
It even applies in the dating world, I would say. So I'm going to do a little plug for this website because I want it to succeed. So there's a website called Fire Dating, which is just firedating.me. And it's kind of niche right now, like compared to the big ones, but it's free to use. And the people who meet each other on this platform find that they're more compatible than on a normal dating platform because it's like people, they only hear about it from podcasts like this. So it's like intellectually curious, somewhat, open-minded, maybe a bit well-educated, and just not super stuck in the matrix of consumerism. And that's a really good place to start for like, if you're looking for a partner, because if you take that and combine like maybe some outdoorsy interests, which aren't always all that common, and then if you also find them attractive, obviously you can't pretend that factor doesn't exist, but all that stuff together is a good start for like more likely to be a compatible relationship. So that, whether it's a meetup or whether it's a dating situation, it's really nice to have peers that do have some compatible type of mind.
Yeah, I wholeheartedly agree. And not for nothing, but you think about what are, in general terms, or at least you see the stats, what are one of the biggest causes of relationship and marital strife is money to a large degree.
Yeah.
When you see that, if you're on the same page with money, obviously it doesn't mean you're going to have a fantastic relationship by definition, not implying anything like that. But at least to get that stressor out of the way, that's got to count for something.
Yeah, I agree. I've never been in a relationship where there was that like train wreck of money situation, but I hear about it so much from other people. And I can't even imagine how people put up with it for a day, let alone years. Yeah. So it is nice to have responsible use of your resources as a factor.
Agreed. So yeah, everybody, if you're single out there in the FI community, definitely check that out. That sounds very cool. And Pete, you mentioned really like trying new things, new ideas. And I think an idea, or certainly a book that's been kind of floating around the FI community recently, is Die with Zero with Bill Perkins. Have you read that by any chance?
Yeah. In fact, I believe there's a small mention of old Mr. Money Mustache in there about the same idea of making use of your time and resources while you're alive instead of saving up for some uncertain future that may never happen.
Yeah, I like that. The concept, and I definitely want to get Bill Perkins on the podcast here. Obviously, I read the book and I thought it was fantastic. The conceptual framework changed my mind and my life. And I don't say that lightly. But then I've heard him on Peter Attia's podcast and All the Hacks as well. And he just put it so brilliantly when you heard him actually on a podcast. And yeah, it's cool to think about, okay, we have this finite lifespan, obviously. Maybe if you're lucky, you get 80, 90, 100 years. If you're really, really exceptionally, I hate to say lucky, because obviously there's some impact that you have on that. But how do you want to spend those years? And also, what's the intersection of spending money in terms of when can you get the best, as he calls it, net fulfillment out of this? And this is a real game changer. Yeah,
in fact, it's a really nice segue. So first of all, this is why like we talked about earlier, like the middle-class lifestyle, you kind of want your FIRE pursuit, your pursuit of early retirement or financial independence to be, it has to be a win-win. You don't really want to sacrifice happiness in the now for happiness in the future. So you can definitely still cut your spending, but don't do it in a way that is kind of wrecking your life. It's good to be frugal, but not cheap is another way to sum it up. But then the Bill Perkins book brings up another thing that I was going to bring up in this podcast, which is there's an opposite side of spending skill. First, there's the one we talked about, which is getting more for your money. And then there's the opposite of it, which is making sure you use the money you have once you have it. Because what happens is if you get good at frugality and then you become old like me, I'm 48 now, you end up with a lot of money because your habits get formed early and then you continue to be efficient and your money is probably going to end up being more plentiful than you expected. But then the habits that you built up, they may or may not be still serving you. Like sometimes you might realize, there's some situations where I probably could spend a little bit more money or be more generous now. And if I don't think about that now, I really am going to get really old and then have millions of dollars that I never spent and then possibly regret certain ways that I didn't benefit from my own money. So a funny story about this is like I was talking to a friend of mine who is more wealthy because he's made some really good investments in the past. So this guy has more than $10 million. Let's just put it that way. And his lifestyle is probably like $40,000 or $50,000 total to run. And he's so efficient that he sometimes forgets how much money he has. And if you think about it, if you have $10 million and you're going to live off the 4% rule, that's $400,000 a year that you can pretty much safely spend for the rest of your life, and you're never going to run out of the 10 million. Especially this guy's a little bit older than me, so it becomes even more safe the older you get. So $400,000, he's living on 50,000, and then he still finds himself agonizing, like, I don't know if I should have this nicer thing for my house, or we'll agonize over small stuff because that's the habits that got us wealthy in the first place. And what we really should be doing is evaluating, hey, is this still a valid thing? And I caught myself doing this the other day too. I was in the grocery store, and I normally shop at Costco, but I was in the normal grocery store, and I needed something like, I always eat this fancy bread that's called Dave's bread. But those jackasses at King Soopers, they had it marked up to like $7.99 per loaf. And I'm sitting there like, that bread is supposed to be $5, not $8. I can't pay $8 for a loaf of bread. And I'm like looking through all the, the different bread options. Like, should I buy a different kind, or should I just not get bread? And then finally I realized, like, you idiot, like, you're never going to wake up saying, damn, I just wish I had $3 more in my investment accounts. So I bought the overpriced bread. And then I've been using that as a lesson to myself ever since, because, like, yes, some things are going to be a ripoff, but part of the joy of having a surplus of money is that you don't have to worry about that. And instead, you should flip the switch and be like, thank goodness I can afford this and it doesn't affect me. And whether that's like you might pay twice as much to get an airplane flight that is at a civilized time, like 10:30 a.m. instead of the 6:30 a.m. flight. And I recently did this for my trip to Phoenix. I could have gone there for like $120 return if I was willing to get up for a 6:30 flight, but instead I paid twice as much so that I could sleep in to a reasonable hour and then go to the airport. And these are the things you really need to train yourself to do later in life, is remind yourself to spend more. And there's some tricks. You could either get an accountability buddy who also is too cheap for their wealth and, like egg each other on with the spending. And then there's another technique where I was thinking of taking my net worth, my investments, and putting a really conservative, like 3% rate on them. And then just having that money go into a checking account that I can never do anything with other than spend. Like, I can't save it. So it's like setting a minimum spending rule for myself, which would encourage me to be more generous and more fun. And I'm like, if there's like, $5,000 in this account that I still haven't spent, then I would be more encouraged to give that away, which is what wealthy people should be doing with their money, instead of just saving it just in case. And then you're 90 years old.
Yeah. The just in case, that's the same mindset as like the one more year syndrome. It's that safety, really this desire for safety, but kind of missing what's the opportunity cost of this, right?
Right. Like, I only have 2 more years left in my 40s, for example. And then I'm a 50-something guy. Like, what should a 40-something-year-old guy who's never going to have money worries anymore, what should I enjoy while I'm still so young? And so that's been helping me to think about these things, because like every day that I never get that time back. And the money part, as long as I don't run out of money in my lifetime, that part is not something I should be thinking about.
Yeah, it is amazing how this it just all intersects. And again, it comes back to that die with zero also, in terms of, okay, are the things that you want to do, and I keep using this one example, like I'm dying to go back to Japan and climb Mount Fuji, which is very doable. It's not like climbing Everest or anything like that. But am I going to do that at 80? No, in all likelihood not. Am I going to do that at 75? Probably not. 70? Again, probably not. I could. But so, I mean, I'm 43. I've got to do this sometime between probably 43 and 65. Okay, well, that's still a lot of time, but it reorients. You can't just keep putting it off for another day. And I think it's very, very easy to do that. And I think I love some of those spending rules, because this really is this like continuum. And I think you and I and people like us have gotten so good at this skill of spending. And I think that becomes part of our identity, not in a bad way. Like, again, I think it's part of this fun game, and it's served us so well, but you have to realize when it's outlived its usefulness.
Yeah. And it helps to push yourself a little bit and get better at the spending. And you don't have to be super ridiculous. Like, no matter how rich I am, I would never buy like $1,000 bottle of wine, for example, at a restaurant, as one example, just because there's always going to be another use for that. Like, you could make 5 children not die, for example, through health charities, for example. And it's okay to be a bit selfish, but there is a limit to my selfishness of what I'll spend on myself. However, right now it is too little. Like, it's too cheap. I'm a little bit too penny pinching when it comes to spending on myself. And I am trying to get a little bit better at that and have more fun. And yeah, what's been working for me so far is just pretending that it's somebody else's money, like putting some money in a checking account and just pretending like it's a corporate account paid for by Apple, for example, or some other infinite source of money, like, oh, it's someone else's money. So how would you spend it if it wasn't yours? And if you were encouraged to spend it? And that really helps.
Yeah, that's super cool. Yeah, as you described before, like, okay, I can put my 3%, which would be this super, super safe withdrawal rate, but still not an unreasonable amount where you're not saying it's 1%, right? Because that wouldn't actually affect change on how you spend. But I'm curious, so clearly you could give away the remainder, which you described before. But I wonder if it would still lead to that optimizing mindset then, and it wouldn't actually impact your spending behavior. If you would just say, all of this needs to go to a good cause for a good reason, so I'm not going to spend this extra. Like, do you see yourself falling prey to that potentially?
Yeah, I don't know about me because there's limits to my generosity. So like, I still value getting treats for myself. It's sort of like I wouldn't be quite like the guy at the end of Schindler's List where he's like, this pair of shoes could be 2 more lives and this belt that I bought could save another life. And like, it is nice to have a little bit of comparison, and if you are compulsively generous and you really would just like live in a shack in exchange for giving all of your wealth to charities or whatever, then you might benefit from a bit more like spending, coaching, if it would make your life happier, if you're actually living a less happy life, because everyone's different. So for me, I don't know. I think I could probably do more of both. I could spend more on myself and I could give more after spending on myself and still be doing more for both sides than I'm doing right now, where if I don't watch it, I tend to just be in a hoarder and accumulator mode still.
Yeah, it's easy to do that. And I love how you use the example of the flights, right? So, because that's something that I've recently put into my own kind of spending rules. Because, yeah, I'm in the same boat as you now, Pete, in terms of, all right, obviously I know time is finite. I probably have more resources than could ever spend. So now it's, how can we try to live the best life that we can while not falling prey to these scripts that we have? That's how I conceptualize it. It's like, of course I have to find the cheapest flight. Like, that's how it's always been. But now for me, it's, unless something crazy happens, I can't envision ever taking a red-eye flight ever again in my entire life. There's always another option. So that's one. The other one is, I will not take a flight certainly before 7 a.m. and almost invariably not before 8 a.m. But there's some wiggle room there because I know how my own brain, my crazy brain works. If I have a 6 a.m. flight, I'm essentially not going to sleep and worrying about missing the flight, et cetera. And that's going to make my life miserable. So I've set a rule. I just will not do that. But yeah, it's interesting when you start doing that kind of stuff and like the positive impact it can have. And like you said, yeah, that flight to Phoenix cost you double. But does it matter? Does it matter at all? The couple $100? No, it doesn't.
Yeah. And I think about experiences too. Like when I booked my hotel, I also could have gotten like a Motel 6 or whatever, perfectly functional, but super crappy in a fine location. And that would have been $80. But instead I got maybe like a $210 hotel just for me, which I really had to reassure myself, like, it's okay, Pete. Like, this is nice. You can enjoy it. You're not going to regret it. And it's not overly selfish. And now, so my hotel is like totally walkable to everything. And it's got a beautiful pool and hot tub. And I might even entertain some guests while I'm there. And I might do some writing, from the beautiful like palm tree courtyard. And I'm going to have a nice experience. 3 nights, I'm going to be savoring this. And I'm going to be like this, because I hardly ever do this, like a solo luxury businessman trip. So I knew that you can either remember like the beige paint and dirty comforters of the Motel 6, or you can remember this resort that you're staying in Phoenix instead. And like, that's totally worth it. An extra $500 or whatever. And I get to have a lifetime memory that's positive. So I think Bill Perkins would be proud of that, at least.
Yeah, that's a good way to start. That's for damn sure. And yeah, it's neat to see this really spreading throughout our community. I know our mutual good friend Carl Jensen recently did this, where I think and this is going to be at your headquarters, so you obviously know this intimately, but I think he paid $10,000 to have one of his favorite bands. I guess they're going to have a concert at the HQ, right?
Yeah, I thought that was crazy too, but I am happy for him for letting go in that situation. And it may or may not be at our headquarters, depending on the crowd size.
Gotcha.
Because we can only accommodate like 100 people. And it would be fun to have more people than that. But yeah, that was cool. I agree. Like totally the right philosophy that Carl is displaying. And our mutual friend the guy who is too efficient with the large savings is another person that we know that I think is getting better at splashing out for meaningful stuff. And I probably shouldn't discuss this too much because, everyone who's listening, who's at the beginning of the journey is going to be like, okay, enough rich people problems. It's not really relevant. But the good news is you do tend to end up in the situation if you put the stuff into action early in your life.
Yeah, I hear you. But I really think it's important. And I know you think it's important as well. And we're not saying to not be smart and not to cultivate that skill of spending, especially at the beginning of your journey. And I know a lot of people like to say, oh, you don't have to deprive yourself at all. You don't have to cut. You just need to earn more money. And yeah, sure, that's cute to say, I suppose. But I think for really the majority of people who are living on that edge, who are living paycheck to paycheck, and they find our podcast, right? Which are really two of the biggest ways that people find the FI concept or FIRE movement. They're almost invariably going to have to cut at the beginning because that's the low-hanging fruit, right? And that's okay. I don't have any problem saying that.
Yeah, I agree. There's no shame in cutting. It's skill. It's sort of like saying, if you're trying to lose weight, what should you do? Eat less sugar and desserts and things that cause weight gain, or should you start exercising more? Well, the answer is not just to start exercising more. A lot of people take this opposite approach. I'm just going to run on a treadmill for 6 hours a day, and then I'm still going to eat cakes and have big gulps and stuff, and nothing happens to their body. And that's because the cutting is essential, the management of the stuff that's doing you damage, which is an expensive lifestyle. And as you know, no matter how much you earn, you can always spend it all. That's why I started my blog, actually, is I grew up in a low income situation, just worked for minimum wage all through my childhood. And then I got a job that was equivalent to $100,000 today, straight off after graduation. And I was like, holy shit, this is amazing. I can save almost all my money now. And then I looked around at my coworkers and they're like, it's hard to make it these days. We're spending all our paychecks. And I was just shocked. How can you guys be spending the amount that we make in this job? That's insane. And then that wasn't even, turns out, the highest paying job. There's jobs many levels above that where people still
right. That was amateur hour, right?
So in other words, income was not the answer to these people because they were making a ton and they still had none to show for it. So that's why you need the skills in place. And then, of course, increasing your income is just going to help you get there faster.
Right. It's an all of the above. But yeah, I think realistically for most people, making those decisions for, hey, what have I mindlessly been spending money on? And you find ways to cut that. And I think we both know your life isn't going to be any worse. In all likelihood, like you're saying, spending time outside, spending time with friends, many of these things, they don't have to cost anything, essentially. And your life is going to be better. That's the payoff, is your life is going to be better, especially when you're not stressed about money all the time. So to me, we're not invalidating the FI movement at all. I think it really is part of this whole life cycle of FI, which I talked about this with Brandon, the mad scientist, recently. And we know he had Ramit Sethi on his podcast recently. And that's kind of part and parcel of this whole conversation, is there comes a time where that shift happens. And I think that's okay. I don't think that's rich people with too many problems. You have to think about, what is life satisfaction, right? I mean, Pete, from my vantage point, you've built this amazing community and you've built a life around what you value. And I think it's really a beautiful thing to behold. And that doesn't happen overnight. That's not just I snap my fingers, the number on my screen tells me I'm at FI and my life is good. This is something you have to work at.
Yeah. And you know what the weird part is? So a lot of times if you just focus on, maybe I should spend more because I have more money, it will lead you to the wrong things, because quite often you already will be spending enough and deficiencies in your life will be somewhere else. So I've been thinking about this because I've had this super good fortune of having a growing surplus over the last 10 years. And then I always think, okay, you're allowed to buy more stuff, but not if it's just for the sake of buying it. If you had a bad day, what was really bad? Is it bad because I don't have an expensive car? No, it was probably bad because maybe I didn't do enough stuff socializing with friends that day, or maybe I didn't get my ass off the couch enough and accomplish the creative pursuits that do make me happy. So I always focus on all of those things, and the making purchases is just one of the options for myself. And of course, every purchase you make adds complexity to your life too. If I had a nicer car, suddenly I'm worrying about Do I have to cover that thing up? Do I have to keep it in my garage? I don't want it to get scraped up and burned by the sun and everything. Whereas having more time with my friends, that does not make my life more complicated in a bad way. It makes it more engaging in a good way. So you always try to do the full spectrum of deficiencies in your life, like health, relationships, make sure your sleep is amazing, make sure your food is amazing. A lot of times those things don't really cost anything. And then finally, if you can afford to spend more, open your wallet to that too. But it's really not just the answer. And this is what my pretend battle with Ramit Sethi is like he likes to characterize the FIRE movement as like a bunch of cheap people and, everyone's constraining and nagging their spouses to take a shorter shower or whatever. And whereas I characterize him as saying, oh, just spend more money and then you'll be happy. That's a rich life, right? But we're both just playing a game. We don't really feel that way. We both truly understand each other's perspective. But the real thing is I just focus more on stuff that doesn't involve spending because that's what makes me happy. And I really love the life that I'm working on right now. And it's really not going to get much more expensive because I've considered the things I wanted to buy and then I already bought them for the most part.
Yeah, Pete, I think that is the perfect way to sum up and conclude this episode. This really is critical, and I'm so glad you're able to carve some time out and have this conversation. I think hopefully this can be part one of more to come because this is really, it's all of these things, right? It is the skill of spending. It is when you get into this concept, you have to make changes. But man, we don't want to lose sight of just how important it is to carve out and build a life that you want to live into. And part of that, like you're saying, means spending money sometimes. It doesn't always mean spending money, but you don't want to preclude that. And I think a lot of us, we don't want to be like the opposite of like the 1980s, which was the he who dies with the most toys wins. We don't want it to be he who died in the FI community with the most money wins. That's not a valuable thing. So yeah, thank you so very much for coming on. I really enjoyed this, Pete.
Yeah, my pleasure. And I hope I get to come back in less than 4 years next time.
Anytime, my friend, seriously. So obviously people can find you essentially anywhere. Mr. Money Mustache, you said earlier in the episode, the new email series, do they just go to the homepage of Mr. Money Mustache?
Yeah, you'll see a shortcut there. Or another good way to do it is if you're an Instagram person, just go to Mr. Money Mustache Instagram. Watch out for the fakes. Mine is the one that has the most followers, but the fakers look the same. But anyway, find my profile. And then I have one of those link tree things that's easy to click on and join the bootcamp as well.
Wonderful. Pete, thanks again.
Yeah, my pleasure.